If you would, go ahead and turn in your Bibles to John chapter 4. And we are continuing our journey through John series. I believe this may be one of the most important messages I've ever preached to the Christian man and woman. Very important. And I thought the Lord just laid it on my heart. It's kind of, when you're preaching through a series, sometimes it might be something you think, well, everybody already knows this, and it's something, but God just really impressed upon me to preach this to you. But the title of the message is Can't Get Much Wider. Can't Get Much Wider. And the reason I believe God gave me that title is because it means that the title is meaning that it can't get more of an opportunity right now. There's not a better time than right now, is what this title is alluding to. And the verse that we're coming to is just again chapter 4 of the Gospel of John, verse 35. It says this, it says, Say not ye, there are yet 4 months, and then cometh harvest. Behold, I say unto you, lift up your eyes and look on the fields, for they are white already to harvest. What we have here is, we've going back just in a few verses back, we see that the woman at the well has realized who Jesus is. Jesus has introduced himself to her. Now she has accepted Christ and believed on Christ. And she makes this statement in verse 29. She says, Come see a man which told me all things that ever I did. Is not this the Christ? She leaves her water pot, she leaves the well, and runs into the city to begin to say that. Can you imagine that she's running through the town? Come see the man. Come see the man. And that's what she's doing. In verse 30, we find out that all the men in the city are coming to meet Jesus. Verse 30 says, Then they went out of the city and came unto him. So you got the woman at the well. She's run off and she's beginning to tell all the men about this great man, the Messiah, Jesus, that she's met. And she's beginning to witness and share Christ with everybody in the town. Because she went out and began to share Christ with all the town, the whole town is coming out and they're making their way toward Jesus. Can you imagine what a scene that must have seen? Can you imagine all of Monroe or all of Walton County coming out and they're all marching down the road going to see Jesus? What a great sight that would be. But what's happening? Meanwhile, it says in verse 31, it says, In the meanwhile, his disciples prayed him, saying, Master, eat. We know his disciples had been to this same city, the city that this woman has run to and began to share the gospel with those people. His disciples are coming from the city, buying groceries, and they've got back to Jesus, and they're trying to get Jesus to eat. And this is what Jesus says to them. I want you to understand that the disciples are missing the whole point here. Sometimes we miss the point. Verse 34, Jesus says this. Jesus says unto them, My meat is to do the will of him that sent me and to finish his work. So, in other words, Jesus is saying, I'm eating. What I'm doing is, but my task is more important than eating. I'm here to do and finish the work that my Father has sent me to do. So Jesus is saying, I don't need food right now. I just need to do the will of my Father. And so we see that then Jesus begins to talk to them and begins to break this down for them. And going back to verse 35, he says, Say not ye, there are yet 4 months, and then cometh harvest. Behold, I say unto you, lift up your eyes and look on the fields, for they are white already to harvest. He says, look, the harvest is not in the future. The harvest is right now. He says, Behold, I say unto you, lift up your eyes and look. He's telling them to look around. While this is happening, I want you to understand, while all this is going on, this whole town is making its way towards Jesus. And they're coming that way. And so this is the same town that the disciples have just came from. They've been in this town. These are disciples of Christ. These are people that love Jesus. These are believers in Jesus Christ. These are followers of Jesus Christ. They've been following Jesus, and they came from Sychar. They're coming from that same town. And so they've missed the harvest right in front of them. They have missed the point. They've missed that the town is ripe and ready for the good news of the gospel. They've missed that point. The good news about who Jesus is. They haven't brought anybody back to Jesus. And so they're missing the point, aren't they? And Jesus begins to, in verse 35, as we break that verse down, Jesus begins to address them on this point. He begins to talk to them about what's going on. Again, and first of all, he addresses them on waiting. Again, it says, say not ye, there are yet 4 months, and then cometh harvest. Then he says this, behold, I say unto you, lift up your eyes. So he's addressing them on waiting. So here's the thing, if you've ever done any planning at all, ever planted something, you know it takes a while for something to come up. You plant, it's kind of in the natural realm of things. There's a planting time, and then you wait, and then there's a harvest time. There is a period of time that you wait. But in the spiritual realm, it's not that way. You don't wait around for the harvest because Jesus is saying the harvest is already here. Everybody, it's ripe now. He says you don't wait around. Now, the Bible does say that some water, or some plant and some water, and Christ gives the increase. That is true. But what Jesus is saying to them, the harvest is ready now. The field is ripe right now. Don't wait around. There's no time to wait. Don't go by the natural form of harvesting. In the spiritual realm, it's time to harvest right now. But then he addresses the white here. He says, say not ye, there are yet 4 months, and then cometh harvest. Behold, I say unto you, lift up your eyes and look on the fields, for they are white already to harvest. Whenever he talks about white, he's not talking about the fields, looking on these fields. What he's addressing them about and getting them to draw their attention to is that coming up the road right now is all these men dressed in white, and what they wear, they're white, glistening in the sun. And he wants them to catch attention that there comes the harvest right there. That is what you need to set your attention on. That's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about these fields here. I'm talking about men, women, boys, and girls. They need to be saved. They need to hear the gospel. That's what he's addressing them about. So every city, every town that you and I live in, where we are, in that town, in that city, in that state, in that country, there are men, women, boys, and girls that need to hear the gospel, that needs to be told about Jesus Christ. And that's what he's telling them right there, that the world is a giant harvest field. And we are to be about our Father's business, sharing the gospel, winning people to Jesus. That's what we're supposed to be doing. But in verse 35 again, you're going to know this verse quite well. You'll probably be able to quote it when you leave here today, which is not a bad thing. But he talks to them about wasting time here. He says, lift up your eyes and look on the fields, for they are white, all ready to harvest. Because when harvest time comes, everything else must be set aside. There's nothing more important than harvest time. He's saying right now is the time. Right now is harvest time. Nothing else matters this, because if you don't get out into the fields, the fruit will rot. There's only a short amount of time to harvest. And look what he's saying to them. He says, starts off, lift up your eyes. He says, don't you say 4 months? But he's saying, open your eyes today, not tomorrow, not next week, not a month from now, not a year from now, but right here, today, and right now is harvest time. Because this is the time is right, the time is ready, the crop is in, it's time to harvest the people. So let me say something to you about this. In life, there's a thing called significance. And what we find of great significance is what we'll put our time and attention to. Now, for example, if things are important to you, having a lot of things, then what'll happen is that you will put a lot of attention on having things. Now, when I talk about all this I'm about to say to you, I'm not saying that having things is wrong. Don't go away and say, well, the pastor said all the things I have, I'm a sinner and going to hell because I've got things. I never said that. But when my attention comes to where I'm so focused on things, and that's all I think about, if I can have more things, then that's what you're going to go after. But you see, another thing is this, is if money is important to you, which we all got to have money to live and to buy and spend, so don't get me wrong now. The Bible doesn't say that money's a sin. It says the love of money is sin. I hear that misquoted many times. So when you have such a love for money that that's all that you want, then your focus is going to be on how can I get much more money. What I have learned in my own life and other people I have seen, when you get some, you want more. You're never satisfied with what you get. You're always wanting more. But what the point is this: if things are the most significant thing in my life, that's what I'm going to go after. If money is the most significant thing in my life, then that's my whole attention. That's what I'm going to go after. Also, if career advancing my career, nothing wrong with it. But if that's my main focus in life, that's all I'm going to think about. And if climbing the ladder, getting to the top, nothing wrong with that. But if that is the most significant thing in my life, that's all I'll focus on. But listen, if winning men, women, boys, and girls to Christ is important in my life, then that's what I'll focus on. See, what the problem is, and I love you when I say this, listen to me. Y'all know I love you, right? Y'all know, some of y'all, yeah, I love you. You know that. But the problem is that a lot of people have the attitude of this: I've got mine and everybody else can go to hell. I don't care. That's the problem. We may not say that verbally, but sometimes our actions by never sharing Christ with the ones around us and the closest ones to us. But what happens is this: is not only is there a significant thing, there's a spiritual receptivity that we struggle with every now and then. See, what this shows us is this: on the outside, that city didn't look like people that would receive Christ. You know, the disciples went into the city. They went into the city and they never brought anybody back. So in their mind, it was like this: they're not receptive to the things of God. But see, what it teaches us is that Jesus knows better, because this woman understood. As soon as she gave her heart to Jesus, what she do? She went to the city and began to share Christ with everybody in the city, because she saw there was a need there, that they needed Christ. The disciples didn't see it. And so what Jesus is saying to his disciples is this: that's people I love. That's people I'm going to be dying for. They need to hear the gospel. There's people in that city, if they're not one to me, they're going to die and go to hell. So open up, he says, lift up your eyes and look on the fields, for they are already white, already to harvest. But then there's the question of where, or the where. He says, lift up your eyes and look on the fields, for they are white, already to harvest. So Jesus is telling us the fields are ready for harvest right now. But here's the thing. Now listen to me. We don't believe what Jesus is saying, though, about the fields being ready to harvest. Because see, what we do, and I struggle with this too, is that we look around us, we don't see white fields. We look around us, and what we see is we see fields with weeds and overgrown. We see the depravity of man on every hand, or sin of mankind. We see killing, right? We see hatred. We see broken vows. We see we see prejudice. We look around and we see violence. We see greed. We see corruption in high places. Is that not true? We see all that, and we see man's inhumanity to man. We cut on the news and we watch and we see where there's another shooting and there's another killing and there's another this and another that. And we see all that, but we don't see why it feels. We see the world as spiritually hopeless place. And that's how we see it. It's easy to get to that point. It's easy to get like that. It's easy to have that mentality because we look all around us and we find it hard to share Christ. We find it hard to witness because people aren't as receptive. They're not spiritually receptive. We reach out to our neighbor and they turn us away. We speak up at work and we get in trouble because we said something to somebody. We share the gospel with our loved ones and they don't want any part of it. Then we invite our friends to church, but they're not interested. And then you know what our conclusion is? Our conclusion is that there aren't no white fields. There's not any white fields. That's kind of the conclusion that we come to, but we don't understand. What we don't understand is that the fields are as white today as ever been. There's more need, there's as much need for the gospel, if not more, than there has ever been. So the where is where it's all around us. Where I shop, where I buy my gas, where I go to school, where I go, what club I'm in. Everywhere I go, there's people all around me, all around you. There's a statistic that says this: 86% of people were asked the question, why don't you go to church? And they said, I'd go to church if somebody asked me. They said, nobody's asked me to go to church. So we don't understand that the fields are white on the harvest. Again, it's easy for the devil to mess with us. It's easy for the devil to get after us and say, well, you've tried. You've invited your neighbor to church, but they've never come. You've invited your family member to church, but they've never come. Now, let me explain something to you. Sometimes you sow and sometimes you water, but God gives the increase. Every time you invite somebody to church, that's a win. Every time you invite somebody to come to church, that is a victory. Every time you share the gospel, you say, well, Pastor Tom, I've witnessed, and I have never seen somebody get saved. Let me say this to you. Every time I've ever went out and witnessed to somebody and led them to Jesus, that wasn't the first time they ever heard it. Somebody like you had went and told them about Jesus, and I happened to be the one that was there to lead them to Christ. So always know that is a win. Every time you share the gospel, every time you invite somebody to church, that is always a win. I know it's hard. Listen to this. Elton Trueblood, he was a Quaker, but he was an author and a theologian and a chaplain. Back in 1946, he said this right here, that a generation would arise with no biblical roots at all. And because of it, American moral values will begin to wither and die. And we saw that start happening in the 60s with the revolutionary actions. Remember free love? Some of y'all remember that, free love and all that stuff. Goes on into the 70s and into the 80s to the 90s until where we are right now. What do we see today? We see people marching in the streets to sin, don't we? Carrying signs that said, it's my right. It's my right to sin. And we see that. We see that all around us. And I want to say to you, it's hard. It is hard because it's spiritual warfare. It is spiritual warfare. In fact, Proverbs 11:30 says this, he that winneth souls is wise. You have to win souls. Don't give up. Don't stop fighting. Don't stop sharing your faith. Don't stop inviting people to church. Pray about it. Love on people. Tell them about Jesus. Don't get discouraged. Don't get down. Keep doing what Christ would have you to do. Jesus tells us this, I say unto you, lift up your eyes and look on the fields, for they are white, already to harvest. So God is telling us to lift our eyes from the trivial pursuits of life and see a world world filled with people that are thirsty, people are empty, they're broken, they're lonely, they're confused, and they are misled. Listen, they're misled by a million false prophets. And where are they? They're all around us. They're everywhere, waiting, hoping for somebody to show them some love, show them the love of Christ. And so the question is this right here. It's the only question that really makes a difference. Since the fields are white for the harvest, the question is, what am I going to do about it? I mean, what am I going to do about it? Am I going to get it? Am I going to get involved, or am I going to make excuses for not doing it? That's really the only question. The question is what is the guy next to me, the lady next to me, sitting next to me, what are they going to do? That's not the issue. That's not the issue. What the issue is, the only question that matters is what am I going to do about all the white fields around me? What am I going to do? Listen to what Jesus says in Matthew 9:37 and 38. Then saith he unto his disciples, the harvest truly is plenteous, but the laborers are few. Pray ye therefore the Lord of the harvest, that he will send forth laborers into the harvest.